Want to do a video reviewing in a very selective way the Republic. And I think that as you put your thoughts together for your exam, your oral exam in the Republic, keep these three lines in mind. They're all related, and they're related in Plato's argument. First, ask yourself which of these three lines represents Plato's theory of human nature. That should be quite easy at this point. Which of these three lines represents Plato's theory of human nature? Go ahead and choose. If you picked the second one, the one in the middle, you're correct. Human beings, and all human beings, Plato would say, are composed of these three parts: the desires, the wants, the impulses, the appetites. That is part of us as human beings. We're animals. Next to that, we have what he calls the spirited part, the will, the part that can get angry and make itself do things, you might say. And then finally, the most important part, the rational part, the part that thinks, the part that reflects on things, the part that can reason, the part that can know, the part that can be in touch with truth and reality. Each human being has these three parts. That is Plato's theory of human nature. If we look at book 4, um, we get a discussion of the virtues: wisdom, courage, moderation, I might say temperance, and justice. Now ask yourself, which is the most important of the virtues for this book? Which one would anyone who read it say is the most prominent of these four virtues? Just ask yourself that. If you pick justice, you're correct. If you didn't pick justice, I don't think you read the book. So in book 4, after establishing his theory of human nature, Socrates asks about these four virtues, and he's trying at the end of it to come up with a definition of justice in the self. But what is wisdom? What is the virtue of wisdom? Wisdom is when the rational part, or wisdom is in the rational part. That if we were to locate wisdom in the individual self or soul, we'd find it in the rational part. Where is courage in the individual? It's in that middle part, the spirited part, the will. Where is moderation or temperance? That's different. That's a relation between two parts. The moderation or temperance, which is basically self control, exists in the individual when the rational part rules over the rest, especially the desires. Finally, what is justice? Well, justice, relying to I think, a large degree on the definition of moderation or temperance, consists of the three parts of the self doing what they're supposed to do, doing their own work and not the work of another. So the individual is just that is Socrates' definition of justice, such as it is. What is it really? It is a argument that the rational part of us is the most important part and the part that deserves to rule and which should be our ruling part. And really, it's an argument against Thrasymachus, whose argument is essentially that the desires should rule. You should do whatever you can to satisfy your desires. And that, from Socrates' point of view, is injustice. And so, what he's arguing for is that a just life is a proper ordering of these three parts of the self. Now, keep in mind that this whole three part of the self thing is based upon the three social classes of the imaginary city. So, what is that last thing doing there, that last line? Well, I hope that it's clear from what I said about book seven, especially book six and book seven. Because we can certainly ask, after Socrates has presented his theory of human nature, his theory of justice, his definition of justice, why should the rational part rule over the rest of the self? Remember, in the way that he's defined justice, this is equivalent to asking, and this is the question of the book, why should I be just rather than unjust? The whole thing is Socrates trying to establish this, that, or trying to establish a certain answer to this question, and establish that you should be just rather than unjust. So, in his terms, to be just means to be led by the rational part. To be unjust means being led by the desires. And I would say that Socrates' final answer to, or his final argument or reason for being just rather than unjust, or for following the rational part rather than the desires, rests in this final line. This is a certain simplified version of the divided line at the end of book six. Simplified because here there's only two divisions, whereas there's actually four. So I'd like to simplify it and say that Socrates' final argument is about reality, and his metaphysics, his theory of reality, is that the thinkable things, or the intelligible world, is more real than the physical world or the visible world. And we think about the different parts of the self. When we think about our desires, what do they connect us with? What do the desires want? Well, they want things in the visible world: money, power, sex, whatever it is. These are physical things, natural things. Whereas the rational part, the thinking part, is the part that puts us in touch with the intelligible world. If we keep in mind that the visible world is less real than the intelligible world, finally, from Socrates' point of view, to be unjust is to follow the desires first and have them be our ruling part of the self. And that means to be concerned with what is, at best, only partly real. Whereas the rational part puts us in touch with truth and reality in its fullest sense. So I would say his final reason for why should I be just, why should I be rational, this is really the last part of his argument, or the last element of his argument. In a certain way, everything in the public has been pointing towards this.